this is Karen Johnson. Today what you're seeing is a project of the Schenectady Proctors Historical Society. And today is January 31st, 2014. And we have as our guest Audrey Brown Hughes, who is the chair of the History Committee at this moment, and also was an early employee of Proctors. So Audrey, tell us how you happened to come to Proctors.
It was just by chance, Karen, and it was the best time of my life. I was working as a volunteer in the Schenectady Arts Council office, which was right next to the theater by the stage door. And I was working on the newsletter, and I had been going to the meetings, so I knew all about Proctors. And I just happened to see Marty Moore, I think, in the arcade, and I said, Marty, are there any openings in publicity for the theater? And she said, well, yes, because Harriet Comfort, who was doing it as a volunteer when the act first started, was leaving. And she said, we need a publicity person. So I immediately gave my resume to Dennis Madden, and I was hired right then and there. He said, when can you start?
And that was the beginning of how long of a career here?
Well, it was about 10 years, almost 10, well, it was 10 years. And then I would have stayed on, except then the theater restructured itself. And Dennis was gone, and his staff was gone, so I had to leave. But I stayed on as a volunteer all these years.
Yes, you had.
I couldn't be upset because I lost my job, because that wouldn't have been fair to me or fair to Proctors. I love the theater too much. So that's how I started.
So tell me about what your duties were. And you were the theater was pretty young when you came.
Oh, it was young. We were all learning. We were a little community unto ourselves, very small. We had one telephone. We had one telephone in the business office.
You mean one instrument?
Well, I think two. We finally got two. We had one in the box office, and we had one. Our offices were upstairs, where the youth orchestra is now, in that whole wing. Dennis's office at that time was in the theater itself, in the theater manager's office, which is now the museum. And he was separated from us. He finally moved down to where we were because it was just too far distant. We had Jackie Mosier was Dennis's assistant, who is now deceased. Wonderful job. We had volunteers. I did the publicity. We had one person in the box office and a very small staff, but we worked as a team. We all had a part in the development of the theater, and we were new. For example, in those days, we were not a house like Civic Players. Mm-hmm. If there was a snowstorm and the theater, you couldn't get there, call up, oh, can I change my tickets? Or I couldn't get there, I'll cancel my tickets. This is a different theater. This is a show theater, bringing in shows. They're the ones that control everything. There were no refunds. There was no changing your tickets. There was nothing. We had to learn all of that. We had to learn all about subscriptions. We had to learn how to develop membership. We had no money. There was no money for advertising. There were no pencils. We had donated materials from GE, old file cabinets, old
They're probably still here.
They probably are. We probably are. And so we had one Xerox machine, one copy machine, but it was not good enough for me to do press releases. I had to go down State Street, before I get to Key Bank, before Liberty, and there was a SCAP. Do you remember the SCAP?
Yes.
Forget what it stands for now, but there was they had a big machine, and you gave them your press release and they'd run it off. You go back in the day. So that's how I did my press releases. I went through 2 portable typewriters for the age of computers. I had no typewriter. It was fascinating. I was paid, and when I first came, there was no money. So I was paid $100 per show. I was on staff, but not on staff, okay. Just paid by show. We had volunteers. We had the little flyers that had to be distributed and posters. All volunteers did that. I remember getting in my car, going up and down Route 50 all the way into Saratoga, distributing flyers to all kinds of venues and gas stations, and would you hang this, and going all over creation, distributing things, because that's how it was done. We had nothing. But it was Mary B., who had Madison North advertising agency, who had a great deal of expertise in matters of publicity and so forth. I did not handle advertising, just straight publicity. press releases, and mostly hospitality, and I'll get into that later. But Mary B. was able to get together, and I remember this room, we sat in this room, and right around the table were all the heads of all the TV stations, the Gazette, the Times-Union, Metroland, everybody. What can you do for us? What can you do for Proctors in publicity? We can't afford to advertise.
So Mary B. was
Mary
helping
B. was
that?
the one that was, yes, she was the one that was the instrumental in bringing, and so the radio stations contributed a lot of their free time. We still had to pay the Gazette and so forth and so on for paid ads, but the media, truthfully, saved the day for Proctors, because in those days, you must remember, this is back in the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. First of all, Albany didn't come to Schenectady. Troy, for heaven's sakes, nobody went to Troy. So we were very provincialized. And that's when Dennis really worked to get that highway sign. He did that on the 890. You see the Proctors Broadway. He worked to get that so people would know at least. And then let me say, too, when we first started, the corporate name is the Arts Center and Theater of Schenectady. So when I was doing my press releases, I would write that the Arts Center and Theater of Schenectady was having this particular show. And then people would say, Arts Center and Theater of Schenectady? You mean Proctors Theater? Or they would say, the Proctors. And so I thought, you're right. Why are we using that corporate name when this is Proctors Theater? So I went to Dennis and I said, Dennis, can we please, we go to the board, can we change this, please? Let's be known as Proctors Theater. And if you want to put act in parentheses, okay. So that's how that changed, and we went really back to Proctors
Right.
Theater.
And you legally filed a DBA, so doing business as, so that was
Correct.
a legitimate
That was
corporate
legitimate,
name.
and that's what people knew. And it was funny, they referred to it as the Proctors, the Proctor Theater.
Well, that's interesting because of Troy Proctors and Albany Proctors, so you'd think it would have been confusing for people.
That's true, and we knew a little about the Troy Proctors to begin with, and then we started going into our history. And Francis Poulin, who was the city historian, I believe, he came into the theater and he said, you know, the White Studio down the road next to the Gazette then is going out of business, and they were the official photographer for the Gazette, and they are getting rid of their photos, and so he said, will you come down with me and let's see if we can get some old photos. Because as a writer and writing about Proctors Theater, I knew nothing. Nobody really knew anything, except that it was taken over, saved by taxes, and the usual story. But the theater itself, what was it like? What did it look like? What was its history?
And those pictures are still here.
Yes, we went down to the White Studio and we got those photos. They're in the archives, and the Gazette was always very good in giving us their photos, any pictures they took of the theater, and as long as we gave credit and so forth. So that's how we started, and that's how the History Committee started too. And then Billy Pemberton was on the board, and she took over as a chair of the History Committee. I stayed on as a staff liaison, and then when I was a volunteer, I still stayed on, worked with the Junior League did the history room, and I worked with them when I was on staff.
So the technology was very
Very
different at that time.
totally different. Totally,
No video cameras.
I wouldn't know. No digital. No, we had no computers.
And you had all the pictures were glossies.
All the pictures. No, that's gone. That's gone now. And then you had a press kit would come with photos in it, and maybe you get 3 or 4. Half of them, some of them were unusable, and so in those days the press was very, very particular. They would not use, if this paper used that one, this paper was not going to use it, and they all wanted scoops. And I was responsible for setting up the interviews and that sort of thing. So I used to, and those were the days too when you could walk into the newsrooms, into the arts offices, and say, here's a story. Would you like to do this story? Take your photo. Which one would you like of the ones you give? So you had this rapport, one-on-one, and I love that. We had a wonderful group of press people. But let me just say, too, about publicity, how different. Well, eventually, let me just go back and say, eventually, I went from the $100 that I got per show to being on staff at a very, very low salary. Let me tell you, low. You probably couldn't get a Coca-Cola with it. I mean, it's so
Well,
low.
I don't know, $2.
Yeah, maybe
I
not.
think
Yeah.
it was a little better than that, but
Well, I'm just saying
no,
that.
I think
right.
the public doesn't really appreciate that many people who worked here had
Oh.
very, very modest
Oh,
salaries.
modest. It's below modest.
And
It was a love. It
You
was a
know,
love of the
and-
theater, an
and
absolute love.
even today, I mean,
It
we
is.
have people that work for us that they're musicians, they love the theater, they're actresses, singers, and so forth.
That's right, and that's carried through. But
is
my job, publicity then, I did not do marketing. Marketing is the advertising. Marketing now incorporates publicity in a sense. That in my day, publicity, press relations was a little separate from the actual paid advertising of buying radio time, buying TV time, which came under marketing. And later we hired a marketing director. But I was still separate.
But the staff grew pretty slowly in those early days.
It did. We had a pretty good sized staff. In fact, I have right here the original staff. Look, it was a good number.
It's pretty dog-eared.
It is. It dates back to 1982.
And it looks like mimeograph
Box
machine.
office staff, concessions,
Mention some of the
stage
people.
crew. Well, let's see. Bob Warlock came on as a box office person. Then he eventually became director of operations, the movies, the gift shop, and he's been here for many years. We had a group sales. Steffi Hirschon did group sales. Linda Detbarn did. She was part of group sales, audience development. She did a lot of the posters, delivering posters and so forth. I eventually got an assistant after many years of screaming, and I have an assistant, Joanne DeVoe, who went on to have her own public relations firm, worked for the chamber. Jackie Mosier was Dennis's assistant, and she was invaluable. She did all the contracts, and she was she was marvelous. We had backstage. Mark Legier did the backstage. We had. You probably don't remember. Stefan. What's his name now? Anyway, he was in the maintenance, and he used to get very upset about the condition of the arcade and the derelicts that were occupying it, and he would say, "You've got to get these people out of here. You've got to clean this up," And he was funny. But
So this was what year?
this was in the 80s, 79, 80, 81, the early years, 79, 80.
So 79 was the demonstration season.
79, and then the other half was 79. 79 was the demonstration series, but the first full season was 80, 81. That's when we brought in Chorus Line. And Chorus Line, began its national tour here.
Wow.
They did. It was only for a week, 4 days, and that was big stuff. It came, and they moved into the theater, and this is a story, but Michael Bennett, came up from New York. Theone Aldridge, who did the lighting, I think it was, she was in the theater, and I could have no press. Nobody was allowed to be in the theater. Break your heart as a press agent, Nobody allowed to know that, and I cheated a little bit. I had Ron Jacob, who was a writer for Metroland. That's a weekly. He went into the balcony during rehearsal. Now, he couldn't write about it until after the fact, so that was okay. So he did, and I have that. It's on record. He wrote about it after the fact. And the chorus line that we had here was an exact replica of the one in New York. Your stocking has to go up a little bit. It's too low. Cassie, you're not doing this right. And everything had to be an exact replica. And Michael Bennett was sitting there,
Giving directions.
giving all the directions, and the whole group was there. It was really wonderful. So that's a story.
Well,
But-
at least you
but
got to see it.
Yeah. But let me go back to the publicity. In those days, too, we were a theater that was, the dressing rooms were kind of shabby. We passed all the regulations of being okay. But we wanted people to remember Proctors. We didn't want them to just be, they're passing through. We wanted to set our mark. So I used to put flowers in all the dressing rooms. I used to get them from funeral parlors. I had friends in a funeral parlor.
Used.
used. And they would give me some of the flowers, and I'd take them out and put them in the, I went to garage sales and picked up all the little, vases and stuff. And then we also, then eventually we had trades. The florists would trade for advertising space in the playbills.
Okay.
And that's how we got flowers to give to the performers on stage, at special occasions. So that's what we had to do, the best way you could possibly do it. But my job was doing press releases and basically hospitality. I had a car, and I would go to the airport and pick up people like Red Skelton and Rostropovich, musicians, and Ella Fitzgerald, and you name it. Eddie Bragg.
So you were our taxi service
I was
at
a
the
taxi,
airport?
and that's when I decided I am going to get a license plate that says Proctors. Because when I went to the airport, not the new airport we have now, not the international airport, but the old airport, I would drive up and they would see Proctor's plate, and they'd say, oh, here, park here, okay, who are you picking up tonight?
Helped you with the police.
Yeah, that's right, it did. And that was and also I used that as advertising, because whenever I went, I had a Proctor's plate and I was advertising the theater, because we just had to advertise.
And if I look at your car today,
Well, I had it until just a few years ago. Yeah.
and someone
I gave
got
up
it
the
away,
license plate finally. Somebody
Wow.
else can have it now.
That's
Yeah.
very nice
Yeah.
that you had it all those
I
years.
did
though.
have it all those years. Yeah, right. I was
So
very
when
proud
you
of that.
did hospitality for the artists and took care of whatever needs they had,
Mm-hmm.
about how many shows were we having in those seasons?
Well, we had a lot. We had 50, 60 shows. Dennis's idea, and we learned this from other theaters, the more you have, the better off you are. If you have less, you're not keeping your name out there. And our biggest, and let me just say this too, in those days, in the 70s, latter 70s, 80s, the arts were not seen as an economic boost. They weren't. And we had the Palace. We were worried because was the Palace Theater going to become refurbished and take our business away? We had the Egg, and the state ran the Egg over in Albany, and they were under scrutiny, terrible scrutiny. So the whole art scene was totally different. The papers were questioning us constantly about our economic. We had to give to the newspapers our financial statements. Every year we had to tell them how much we made, what our deficits were. They were on us constantly. Dennis always had a press conference, and this is how much we made, and so even in the paper. And so the first big story I got from the Times Union, I was thrilled. We're going to have a big story about Proctors. Well, to my disappointment, it was not. It was about Proctors, but it was about Proctors in competition with this one, in competition with that one, economically, and it was a totally different slant from what we wanted. Mm-hmm. And it was a totally different atmosphere.
So in those years, was there money made some years and not other years?
Oh, sure. You have a time when people can't get here. You had snowstorms. As long as the theater group gets here, the show goes on. You can't make refunds. But if the people can't get here, then you can give refunds. Those things we learned. We had professional people come in telling us how to do subscriptions, and Dennis put together big subscription packages. We started to build our membership. Do you want me to tell you about the Hal Holbrook story at this point?
Sure, tell me about Hal Holbrook.
Well, when Hal Holbrook came in the 80s, I think it was 81, 82, his first time here as Mark Twain. He and Dennis went out to Ingrid's, which was on J Street, after the show. And Hal Holbrook, they struck up a wonderful friendship. Hal Holbrook gave us our first grant of money. He liked the theater so much. And people get this incorrectly at times, but I have the press release that gives it correctly. He said he would give $1,000. Now, here's a celebrity. He would give us $1,000. That was, oh my gosh, if 5 other people would give $1,000. Mm-hmm. And so I was called, and they said, arrange a press conference at the airport tomorrow morning. This is the following morning. I never arranged a press conference at the airports before, but I sure did, fast. And we had all the press there, and he announced the grant before he got on the plane that this is what he was doing. And we made it. We made it. And it went to not refurbishing the seats, because that campaign had already started in the 70s, or 70s, 80s, 79, 80. We took that money and announced that the money would be to refurbish the seats. And if you go in the theater, and I think it's still there today, row HH is for Hal Holbrook. The whole row is HH for that. And so he was a very special person. I mean, to have a celebrity say, well, I'll give you money, and that was really special.
Yeah. Well, he always loved Proctors. He was here many times.
Well, you gave him the Patroon Award. He became Patroon of the theater.
And I remember because we were sitting up in the balcony and had this ceremony looking over you can imagine the shot from what's behind us. It was quite an impressive thing. And I had written an article in my life about a person who was his agent, who was a friend of my dad's.
No, really?
And so I was telling him this backstory, and it was kind of fun.
Wow.
So, well, that was a wonderful thing. Did you have anything to do with entertaining potential donors and things like that?
Not the donors, no. No, I did not do any of that. That was done by another group. We did not have a guild then. We had a group of people who were responsible for that. Betty Barlin, Day Gillespie, the head of the volunteers, they worked more or less in that. No, I didn't do that. But I did, again, trying to make Proctors stay in the minds of those that were traveling here. Mm-hmm. I always put up a welcome in the old dressing room, and then stairs going up to all the dressing rooms off the stage there by the old green room. I always had a welcome to the cast, and then from both Dennis and myself. And then in the star dressing room, I always had a special welcome to whoever the star was, and I've saved most of those. If it was a foreign group, a foreign orchestra or foreign whatever it was, chorus group, I would have somebody write a welcome in their native language. And so I had people write in French and Finnish and Finland, I think it comes to mind, whatever language it was. So I've saved some of those.
When I asked you about the hospitality, I was thinking about the owner of the Van Dyke, who was a great friend, Marvin Friedman.
Marvin Friedman, yes, he entertained. Yes, he entertained all the time for some of the stars in his home. Oh yes, yes, and we named the star dressing room for him in the original stage area, backstage area. Marvin.
When we didn't have any money to entertain, he kept us afloat.
Right. Well, there were many people that did not, there were many people who did that. Mrs. McDonald and Kay Rosendahl, and there were many people who anonymously gave that kept us going. And then they started the membership campaign. We began to have some members. Now, let me go back to Hal Holbrook. When he first came here, this is another story. When he first came here for Mark Twain Tonight, with each show you have certain specifications where a table has to be this high, a rug has to be this kind. We had certain specifications for the chair and the rug and whatever. And again, we met as a group. It wasn't just the stage that knew all this. We, as a group, Dennis was saying, we've got to have this. Anybody can help out. I remembered St. Helens had this gorgeous, gorgeous red gold chair on the altar. I went up, and they loaned it to us. So that was the chair we used for Mark Twain. And then I went over to St. John the Evangelist, into their rectory, and they had a gorgeous oriental rug. So they rolled it up, and they gave it.
You got that.
I got that, too.
And little did they know they were going to have Mark Twain smoking all over it.
Right.
That was show. It was kind of a cloud.
You're right. So that was, and then of course, I would be responsible for picking up, as I said, the airport, or taking them to the airports or trains or whatever, taking them out to lunch or dinner and whatnot. And can I go on for another story? We had the Joffrey II Ballet here, I think, in the early '80s. Well, I can tell you when, because I have the program right here. Joffrey II was the secondary company to the famous Joffrey. And then this is what the playbill looked like.
Okay.
That was
Looks
the
like-
act. It was
Right.
act, and this was the program for Joffrey 2.
Much
And
more homemade than today.
oh yes, this was strictly. Oh yeah, ours were
Okay.
originally homemade. Anyway, Joffrey 2 dancers. Let's see, when was this was 1980, April 18th to the 20th, 1980. This Joffrey 2 secondary group was coming, and I picked up Sally Bailey Bliss, who was and her secretary or assistant at the airport. We went out to dinner, and she let it slip that Ron Reagan was going to be dancing he's in the company. That's the son of the president who had just decided to become a ballet dancer, and he was making his debut at Proctors. But she said, oh, you can't tell anybody. You can't even tell your manager.
Oh dear.
What was I to do? I was torn. My loyalty to the theater and my loyalty to a company that depended upon us to give this boy a chance to be artistic in his own right. They had no security. What is the problem? Nobody knew it, and they did not come with security, and they were frightfully afraid. So what do I do? What is my moral obligation? And I did not tell Dennis, and I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing because I had to get their trust, and I had to give Ron Reagan artistic
Opportunity, really.
And he did. And he danced in a thing called rodeo for about 2 seconds.
That was a brief debut.
That was a brief debut. Nobody knew it. His name is in this program. Nobody ever knew it. And he did not get credit for dancing with Joffrey 2 Ballet until months later when he appeared in Buffalo. Buffalo got the credit. Shea.
When you knew deep in your heart Proctors was the one.
Proctor's the first. But I think I made the right decision.
So just flipping through there, I see that Price Chopper had a big ad. So they were really with us they're behind there.
Oh.
They were really with us from the very beginning.
Schenectady Savings, yes.
I mean,
yes.
if we go through, there are many businesses
Yeah, there's
that
Price Chopper right there, right?
maybe aren't here today, but
Yep, Schenectady Savings and Loan, which is,
merged.
yeah, right,
merged.
yeah, right. Carl Company, of course.
Did you ever have any dealings with Mr. Carl in your
Mr.
travels?
Carl was not personally, but he was right here, always. Well, when Joe Helfman came on board as chair of Carl Company, and the Carl Company underwrote the children's series that we have today, school series. The Carl Company did that.
There's a lot of support that was found in the.
Oh yes.
Did the atmosphere, as far as the knowledge the public had about Proctors, change over the 10 years you were here?
Oh, I think so. Yes, people loved coming to Proctors. They loved its history. They loved what it was doing for the community. They saw it as an economic opportunity. And then, Proctors did change the scene because you remember they deeded the people on all the businesses on State Street deeded all their property over and formed a corporation so that whole of downtown would be saved. Then we put in the moat. I'm sure others have talked about this before. I don't want to go into all of that. Yes, it did change, but it took a lot of hard work.
Now, I've seen some data, and I don't have any idea because the membership records were probably kept in a very primitive way at this time. It was kind of either very early computer or pre-computer days, but that in the beginning, between 50 and 60% of our audience was from Schenectady County.
Oh, yes, very definitely.
And today, it's something
All over.
underneath 30.
Oh, yeah.
And even though it's still significant, the area covered has expanded.
Oh, it
very
has, and
greatly.
it did in those years too. In the 80s, we had busloads coming in from Hartford and Utica and all over the place in group sales. Very definitely, we did, and the atmosphere. Once you broke down that barrier, that fear of traveling from one city to the other, and
It's a terrible fear.
terrible fear. I mean, really.
Across the river, oh dear.
Oh, yes, right. And so we had to. That was a basic thing.
But it is still true that from a membership point of view, even though that's changing a little bit, the Schenectady people are slightly more attached to being a member, a paid member, than the rest of the region. Though we're getting lots of regional support as well.
Oh, that's good to hear. Yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I have lots of, is there
So-
anything else you want to know about the early publicity days?
well, the acts you had were pretty classy acts, weren't they?
Oh, they were. We brought in, and let me just say this, the Schenectady Concert Association went out of business, and I think that was the name of it. Helen George was very much involved in that. And they, in going out of business, they decided to give all their funds that they had on hand to Proctors with the idea that we would bring in the orchestra, we would bring in the classics, the classic symphonies, the singers. So in the early days, we had Jesse Norman, we had Marilyn Horne, we had the famous orchestras of the world, and I can't think of them all. The great operas, and particularly the orchestras. I listen to WMHT, and I hear them talking about this orchestra leader from some country. I think, oh, he was at Proctors. Oh, he was at Proctors. I met him. You know, all these small, they all came here. But that was expensive, and we did not get the large crowds. Let me tell you too about rock. Of course, the Palace Theater was the venue for rock. That's owned by the city, and they were bringing in the rock. We did have Billy Idol. He was and I went to that concert. That was absolutely stupendous. We did bring in a film showing, a live concert of Grateful Dead, and everybody came dressed in their Grateful Dead outfits and so forth. And we may have had a couple of other rock acts. But the balcony was shaking. And in the early days of the theater, there was a big ad that said, somebody said the balcony was unsafe. And so Proctors gave $1,000 reward to anybody for anybody who could prove that, who could unprove that. I don't forget the story now. But anyway, they came in and they proved that the balcony is co-constructed. It's supposed to move a little bit, you know.
But I felt that myself.
Yes. So we didn't do any rock concert after that. We decided, let's not do rock concerts, because it did move a little bit too much. Even though it was declared, we had all kinds of people come in, check it all out, it was safe, but we decided then and there, we will not do rock concerts as such anymore.
Well,
They want to dance in the aisles a little bit, okay.
We can let the Palace.
Yes, right.
I don't
right.
even know if they're doing them so much, because
No.
most of the big rock concerts are going
No, that's
to
right. And they go the
arenas
time,
now.
big arenas, yes, but they were coming.
So that's a wonderful job you had. And
It was a special job. I loved every single minute of it, and I love the interaction with the performers. They were so down to earth, so thankful. They loved Schenectady even in the early days. They really did. They loved coming here. And I had Nancy Curran drew up a little brochure for me with a welcome. It showed somebody getting off the bus and somebody saying, "Where are we?" And then it was Proctors, and then inside was all the restaurants, all the places they could go after to library, everything about Schenectady. So they had it in their hands about where they were. It was not as slick as it would be today, but it was done very nicely.
And were there very many multiple night shows at that time?
What do you mean multiple night shows?
Well, where we'd have 3 or 4 performances.
Oh
of the
yeah,
same
well,
show.
Chorus Line, we used to have weekends. Chorus Line expanded. Annie, when Annie came, I think it was 81, 82, Annie came for a week. The lines to get tickets were all the way wrapped around Liberty to get tickets. We had to put...
So the publicist is pretty happy about that.
I was, yeah, everybody was. Yes. It wasn't me, it was the show. Everybody wanted to see Annie. Yes, we did have weekend shows, and then we expanded to a week. Very definitely a week.
Well, we're going to talk to you at another time about some of the stories
Oh,
about the
yes,
stars
yes.
that you have been with. But I want to thank you very much for being with us today and talking about this and
pleasure.
all your professional and volunteer work for Proctors. It's made a big difference. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Thank you all for watching. This has been a project of the Schenectady History Committee, an oral history project to revisit some of the early wonderful happenings at Proctors, and we're just delighted that you're watching. Thank you, Audrey Brown.
Thank you for
Hughes.
having me.